Hello, everyone. Welcome. Huge thank you for joining us today for our conversation about tackling the build versus buy conundrum. This is a LeadDev webinar created in partnership with Dscope. The webinar will last roughly 45 minutes, after which both myself and the panelists will head over to the LeadDev Slack to answer your questions in the hashtag Building Software channel. We may also have time to answer a couple of questions live, so please do submit those through the Q&A feature on Zoom. So let's get started with some introductions. My name is Lima, and today I'll be joined with Sylvia, Nikhil, and Rishi to share their experience and insights on the build versus buy debate. I'll ask each of you to introduce yourselves. So let's start with Sylvia.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sylvia. I am the software architect who focuses on databases. I've worked at companies such as SendGrid, Twilio, Box, and I'm happy to be here.
Nice to see you again, Sylvia. I'm always tempted to call you DB Smasher. Would you like to go next, Nikhil?
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Good morning. I'm Nikhil, and I've been in tech for like 12 plus years now, and been in enterprise software, ML systems, and distributed systems is my passion. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Nikhil. And finally, Rishi. Hello.
My name is Rishi, one of the co-founders of Dscope. Serial entrepreneur. This is my third company technically, and I'm excited to be here, joined with this panel. Dscope enables authentication and authorization for apps. Good to be here.
Awesome. Welcome. Thank you. Very impressive panel, I'd say we have. So we all know there is no one-size-fits-all approach to the build versus buy decision-making process, but there are ways to make it clearer, like most things, and easier. So let's break it down and see what it takes to make such a decision and jump into our questions. Yeah. All right. So question 0, since we're all engineers here and we index on 0, before we get into it, let's frame our conversation with some examples of specific categories of products that lend themselves towards buying. So we all know what this looks like in practice. Rishi, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I think good question to start with, right? I think the categories that I see very often throughout my journey in building products is things like where you need very specialized skill set. Payment is a good example, and or SMS and telephony, as Sylvia said, she's worked at Twilio in past, right? So products from payment, telephony, or anywhere where the requirements across different products is common enough, where you need more skills to build it, those are good categories to go by. Again, self-centered in the sense that authentication, authorization is another category I would put there because you need skill set. But then there's other side, a lot of different other categories, such as security tools, right? I mean, and I'm going to put even buying, like using an open source is same as buying in some senses. So an encryption library or other aspects where you could use specialized pieces which are pre-designed, pre-built to be used. So those are the categories that come to mind.
Those are good examples. Sylvia, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I would say a good litmus test for buy is, would this be part of our differentiation as a business? Is this something is this core to the thing we sell? So for example, when I worked in the business of sending email, we did not want to build our own time series database to track the performance of our software. Did not seem like it would actually be close enough to the making of the money. And so I obviously that litmus test gets murky in certain spots, and sometimes it becomes more about like business strategy. Is the company going to expand other products? Like it can get more hairy than that. But as a question 0, that tends to be like not a bad one to start from.
I like laughed a little bit when you said I'm building a time series database from scratch, because I was in a situation once where I worked with someone who wanted to build like the MapReduce framework.
Wow. I mean, to give the flip example, you have a company like Honeycomb whose business is helping you do, and so they actually built their own custom database. That is one of the very few cases where, like me as a software architect, if someone comes to me and says, we're going to build our own database from scratch, unless you're honeycomb, I have a hard time understanding why.
Supporting that. Right.
Yeah.
Mikhail, what do you think?
Yeah, I think I'll just quickly add, I think underlying what Sylvia said, like non-differentiating feature, as well as we have to be mindful of the nuances in the build. So, for example, there are systems where, like Rishi mentioned, like authentication system. Like we may not understand all the nitty gritty and gotchas where it can go wrong. And as builders, we always feel like let's go and build. But it's sometimes it's good to take a step back and see, hey, do we understand the domain correctly? And those things are like very well worth buying to help out.
That makes sense. That leads perfectly well to our next question, actually. We kind of touched upon this, but I'm going to put an emphasis on number one. What is the number one factor to consider when buying and leveraging a third-party vendor's product? Sylvia, would you like to start? The number one factor.
Number one factor. So when I've been involved in those conversations a few times with different parts of the stack. I think if it's a supporting function, like when depends on where it is in the stack. So when I'm looking at, say, the options to buy for monitoring products or performance tracking products, reliability is a huge thing. I don't want to use a monitoring product where I am the biggest customer they have. Or they are, like, say, brand new. They may be doing something very interesting with the data, and have a good case for how much better they can be at introspection. But at the end of the day, if the volume of my presence as their customer is too much for the stage they're in maturity, that's a big no-no in that particular part of the stack. I don't want to be in an incident and have my monitoring product not be there for me. And then as we go on, probably another general principle is there's the amount, like the actual support that I'm going to have and the familiarity with the product internally, because at the end of the day, you don't want something that is so new that when it doesn't behave as expected, everybody's looking at each other wondering what to do.
Absolutely. That makes total sense. Rishi, Mikhail, do you have anything to add? What's your number one factor when you consider?
I'll actually think from my perspective, number one is to create a very clear interface between your product and what you're buying. Because I'm as a vendor, talking as a vendor, but still I always advise. And when I have built products, I've always thought there needs to be a very clear line and interface, a service to say, in future, things change. You're going to abstract it out. You may replace the product. The company may not be around. There's so many things that happen. To Sylvia's point, it was like, hey, am I the biggest customer? And if the company dies, what happens? To protect yourself as a builder, as a company, clear interface of what you're going to use, what are you going to do, where is the data stored? That's very critical. So if the product does not have very clear interface, very clear API, and it's all over within your code base, that's going to be a mess, and you're definitely going to suffer in long run.
That's a good design. That makes sense.
Yeah. I would just add a quick thing on that is, as Rishi was mentioning, keeping the vendor like contracts clear. Also, like ironing out the failure points where they can fail, and how will our system recover to meet those nines or meet our SLOs which we have, so that we always don't point finger at the vendor. We have our own failover backup options to recover and delight the member experiences.
I love all of these examples because they're very related to just building software in general. Like these are all very good practices. So similarly, let's flip the switch. On the other hand, what is the number one factor to consider when building in-house?
Are you sure you still want to build it? I'm one of those, like, code is a liability, and so if you're writing it, you better be damn sure you actually need that.
That should be the title of your next book. Code is a liability.
I did not come up with that. Not going to take credit for that one. I have heard it from folks who are smarter than me. But yeah, like you should really, like, it needs to be a high bar to deciding to build a thing in house. As if you already know it's not part of your core product offering. Having said that, if you land at the number of reasons that you feel are sufficient to say that this is a unique problem that we do need to have to build something ourselves, and the 80% off the shelf solutions are not enough for us, do not go and choose a language that nobody else is familiar with. Like the idea of sending off a senior engineer because they really like Rust and they're going to go build that thing in Rust, and then nobody else knows what is happening in here. I highly recommend against that. Generally speaking, if you are going to build, then you need to be very, very careful about the requirements and the scope of your initial balance, the initial scope of what you're building with giving incremental value. Do not say, I'm going to go build the best time series database and then send a team of engineers off for a couple of years and hope they come back with a silver bullet. Nobody's going to be happy with that. It's not going to be a good time series database because nobody has used it while they were building it. And there's opportunity cost that is very, very expensive and very hard to quantify in sending people off to build a thing without good clarity on what they're building.
Definitely.
I think I was going to joke and say, Sylvia's like, pick up the latest language which came around last year, because we all like to invent languages. But
I'm a DBA man. Like I'm still getting used to the idea of all the different databases. Like I'm pragmatically, I get it, but like my brain is still, but bash.
But I think good point that you raised, Sylvia, was the opportunity cost, which I think majority of us ignore. All of us get excited to build something new, and then the opportunity cost. But I think to me, what I have learned, if you're really building a product and if the thing is not core, is the total cost of ownership. Building the software is almost one fifth or even sometimes 1/10 the cost that you will incur in 3 years by building that feature. And that, I think, is very important thing for leaders to think like, wait, you're going to build this? It's going to take one person 3 months, and then we think you're done. You're never done.
Yeah, it's an investment.
That, I think, is the
full story, bro.
So for me, I think when I'm going for building, I also take a step back and see what stage of my company is at, right? If I'm very early stage, I'm before product market fit, I just want to test out stuff. I'll use, for example, OpenAI's model instead of brewing my own model from ground up. If I am in like a middle stage or getting towards the late stage company, I am looking at like appetite, right? If my business, my product has the appetite of building in-house, and if they decide, okay, everybody has a support of building in-house, still when it's good to like tie it up with like a feature or a user experience we are delighting, instead of just like calling it like platformy, infrastructure like a buy. So that everybody is like on the ship and fully inclined, because that journey is long. And you need support from each and every functional group of your organization to support in that long journey through headcount, through funding, through launch. So you want all your partners together instead of just going in and building and then people are asking, where is my headcount going? So something to consider on that.
That'll be there are two book titles here. Where's my headcount going? And the journey is long. I'll stop with those jokes. Sylvia. Your hand is raised.
So I raised my hand to answer the first question in the Q&A.
Perfect.
I'll just hit the answer live. What are some situations where it's appropriate to build? Any practical examples? I mentioned one earlier on where it was Honeycomb, and they have a post out there. No Charity Majors has written publicly about this. About the choice to go build their own custom database, and that they did not even come to it lightly, that they looked at many options and sort of weighed the pros and cons of those different data stores. Ultimately, it was, we're not a company that sells a database, but if the database that has all of your data for you to query, to understand your performance, is not doing all the things we want it to do, then that is an existential risk to the product succeeding. So that's probably the closest thing to like the very obvious one is like building your own features in your own product. Obviously, that's a build. You're not going to just create a product by taping together other people's APIs only. You're going to have to present your own little differentiation. But then the next order that is still probably valid for build is, this is the thing that is so core to us delivering the product that if it's not doing certain table stakes, it's existential. Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think of examples. And the thing is, on that second order requirement, that needle moves across the years slowly, but it happens. If anybody here is familiar with Wardley maps, Simon Wardley, you'll see the explanation of how a thing in technology can start off as brand new and sort of slowly over the years move towards commodity. There was a time when there was no SendGrid. Exactly. Or even like, the current things that are commodities like telecoms or email. Companies like SendGrid and Twilio turned them into a commodity across the years. And so no one anymore tries to go, I mean, I know that there are still companies who try to send their own email, and I will sometimes sneak into the headers and go, what are you doing? But for the vast majority, like, you're trying to send emails, you just go and open a SendGrid account. You're trying to send SMS, you go open a Twilio account. 10-ish years ago, that was less so. So we have to be also aware as we mature in our career that those needles move. It's like, these are not just like sun is in the east and like that's never changing. So we have to be aware of the maturity of these things as well.
Well said, well answered. Shall we jump to the next question in our Q&A?
Sure.
Great.
To that. So the question I'll repeat is, what is the reason you think the big companies like Google, LinkedIn, Facebook are building, let's say, utility software like monitoring, databases, cloud orchestration, etc.? And it's a great question. And having been in those large companies, I think the decision there is not usually like, should we use a vendor or should we build in-house? Because at those companies, the scale is super high. And usually what they are trying to build or any monitoring system they want, nobody has done that level of scale before. And they have very custom requirements. And having asking like Datadog to build their own iGraph for Amazon's example and graphing tools, which has been homebrewed for over the years, will take years for Datadog to catch up. So the decision is mostly sometimes it's like, hey, we have 5 different kind of like half-baked tools in different orgs. Should we merge them? Should we use A or B? Where should we put all our chips at? Instead of buying a third-party vendor, because the cost of anchoring a vendor will be too high compared to building in-house for them.
I would probably also just add to this. When these companies started, and when these companies already hit like actual planet scale, and the phrase planet scale should not be taken lightly, some of these companies are the ones who built the clouds that everybody else builds on. So like that's a huge factor. For the rest of us now, after AWS has been around for almost 20 years, and the other cloud vendors have been around for quite a while too, that has removed a lot of the things that we had to build ourselves in the past. So when we say, well, you are not Google, like when we tell a company that is even Series C or even close to IPO, but you're not Google, that is not like putting down their scaling thing, but it's a real thing. It's like, you're not actually planet scale, and you should always try to find those solutions elsewhere, because your engineering time is the most expensive resource you have.
Absolutely. Rishi, would you like to answer the next question about vendor lock-in?
First of all, very excited, very engaged audience. Love it. These questions are better than us discussing here. I think the excellent question, Bobby, here. And the question is, fear of vendor lock-in is often what we hear when approaching the buy scenario. And he mentions that we talked about the abstraction layer. So that's great. But I think the other question he asks is, his hate to say that I have come across resume-driven development in most companies I've been as well. I think that's a few things here that Bobby mentions, which is one, yes, the best way to avoid this vendor lock-in is very clear abstraction. I'm a big believer. And I think it's, by the way, that clear abstraction is good even for the vendor you're trying to go buy, because of the availability reasons that Nikhil mentioned, right? I mean, I don't want to be in a scenario where I'm held accountable as a vendor for service interruption that happened on the other side. So clear interfaces, very important. Second, by the way, I think also clear requirements. And I think this is underestimated because what tends to happen is when you're building, the requirements are evolving. When you're buying, you want to write the requirements clearly. But think about it. If you have very clear requirements, and I think this is hard to do in most cases, but a very good discipline. And I force my team to say, go write down 2 pages of why you need it, what you need, what do you not need, what will you not do now. Even if you're building, what will you not do now and what will you do in a year? Because it will change. So clear articulation of requirements will drive both abstraction and a cost discussion, because the long-term cost discussion will come in with those requirements. Resume-driven development. I have not used that phrase. Very good phrase. I hate to say, I think this is a sensitive topic, and this is one thing I would encourage leaders to really take it on the face, right? I mean, you really need to go and say, guys, is this valuable to the business? Is this not valuable to the business? Eventually, all of us are working for driving the business forward in a company. And if it is just to learn because it's cool, or it's the new language, or it's the new database that we want to go,
or it'll help get you promoted. It's like a similar topic.
I think it's going to be a wrong decision, but depends on the company culture. I've always top down, go with the company goals, requirements, drive the decision. But excellent question.
Absolutely.
Yep. I'll just quickly add how for me it has worked to build that abstraction layer in the past is, think of it like a car. So we want to know what features, like what Rishi was mentioning, what features we really want in the car, and the tires can change, right? The tires could be vendor A, vendor B, and we can swap out the tires if we get a better deal. For a multi-cloud example, if GCP is offering us better deal, we can switch over to AWS, for example. Vice versa. So in that case, having that contract with your teams to talk to your APIs, and the vendor is behind the scenes, so that we can replace that wheels whenever we need it, and when our business is ready to go build a solution, for example.
Good metaphor.
Yeah. And I will also say, like, the discipline of just understanding your domain boundaries and your fault lines in between your components. Like, if you exercise that a lot with the vendors, it's good for you internally too, because Lord knows I've been in incidents where it's like people didn't understand that this one microservice in the corner there actually hinged like 3-4 products across the board and caused a multi-hour incident while people understood what the heck was going on. And that was entirely like a discipline around fault domains and not even related to build versus buy. Should I move? I marked the next question. Yeah, okay. So the next question says, do you write a decision log or similar to take a decision about build versus buy? If yes, do you follow any templates? I'll start off by saying that most companies don't write decision logs for build or versus buy or otherwise, for really anything at all. I think it's a good thing to start a muscle around early. A good template for it is architecture decision records. It can look, ADR. I know ADRs, or I've seen companies do it as RFCs. A point of advice when you're deciding on templates is whether the kind of decisions you are logging will need to be read. Like, who's the audience who's likely to read them? Are they only going to be read by engineers, or also like product managers, project managers, business executives? Because then, you don't want a template that sounds kind of very engineer-like and hard to follow and hard to digest for folks who are not in engineering. We don't operate in a vacuum, and most of the time these decisions do not just impact engineering; they impact the whole business. So you want them to be digestible for the rest of the business.
Absolutely.
I also wanted to say a similar thing, was like the audience of this build versus buy decision is not engineering team. So beware of writing like a spec document. So try to make it more businessy. And I think using like what are the key factors, and to consider how when build and buy like compares against each other, and reviewing with your business teams is important. And I'm very big fan of writing and penning your thoughts in the document, because 2 years later, when a new engineer asks you, why did we decide to buy? and why does this vendor sucks, or like it's awesome. Oh yeah, please go back and read the document, and we have it all answered there.
Or even 3 months later, and it's another executive who just joined, and you're like halfway through the integration already. That didn't happen.
Oh, that's true.
That sounds so familiar. All right, those were echoing Rishi's sentiment. Those were really, really good questions. I think now we will jump back to our questions for our panel. Okay, cool. Let's see. All right, so top of mind, are there myths or false connotations that are associated with the buy route? Like vendor lock-in was one of them that was asked. If so, how would you counteract those myths that typically are associated with buying? Rishi, would you like to go first?
I can go first. I think here, this almost are the objections. So vendor lock-in is the number one objection that I hear.
Yeah.
The second one, which is very interesting, touched upon the Google and Facebooks of the world, is my requirements are unique. And it's very interesting. I think I am a different company. My requirements are unique. Nobody else faces it, is a big myth. And I think it's very interesting for most of the category of products that we talked about early on, that SMS, Twilio, SendGrid, all of these. That's how the world started, by the way. If you were to go back 15 years ago, everybody says, no, my SMS sending requirements or email are very different. I want a template. I want to customize the template. I want to put a different reply to different from addresses. And people thought they were different because the software industry was immature. That particular category was immature. Over time, those requirements became standard. Everybody learned to do the things the same way. And that became a tire, as Nikhil said, right? Which could be replaced and comes with a size of 34/R15, right? So I think the point I'm trying to make is your requirements may be unique if that category that you're trying to build or buy or decide on build or buy is fairly new. But at certain point of time, those category, the requirements become very standardized. So that's actually a big myth. And if you really goes back, write down your requirements, and then very quickly you'll find out whether they are unique or not unique. I'm not going to claim they are not unique or they are unique, but writing in a discipline to say, what do we really want to build versus build or buy is critical. But I hear this all the time. No, we are a unique company.
Yeah.
Identity is very unique to us. It's close to us. We cannot outsource this. It's not unique.
Right.
You're not special. Just kidding.
I will also add, like, I mean, it's definitely like Rishi is correct. But it's sometimes hard for companies to hear that from a vendor, even if the vendor is right.
Yeah.
But I will add, like, from the inside, as a software architect who helps the teams build, when they come and say we're going to build X because the requirements are unique, and I'm like, but you're building service discovery and console exists. Like, what are you doing? My answer is always, are your requirements unique, or are your requirements not clear enough? Or are your requirements not actually using SLOs and saying things like real-time data without understanding what is even real-time? A lot of times that's the case, where it's actually, not enough rigor in the product management side, or not enough conversation between product management and engineering when setting the requirements, and you end up with fuzzy requirements that sound more like a press release than actual requirements for building a thing.
Yeah. It's like marketing. It's like, what's really underneath? What are we really doing here?
It's cool if you want to say that in the press release,
right?
Like or in the billboards.
Absolutely.
Like, it's cool.
In practice, what is
build
this?
based on that?
Yeah, no, that is incredibly relatable, Sylvia. Mikhail?
Yeah, I think one interesting myth I see is the vendors on the market do not have all set of requirements I really need. So I'll go ahead and build it. But they can always be like a hybrid solution where we have a vendor which is like non-differentiating technology, and we have our secret sauce built on top of it, which combines together and builds like the best experience, speeds your organizations, and does everything what we need. So it doesn't need for a buy solution to meet all your requirements.
I think that's a very good point, Nikhil. In the world of API, I see if you're talking of dev products and the console and all the other technical products that we are talking, that's a good point. It's eventually an API. You can actually abstract that piece out and then build on top, because there's nobody saying that you cannot
exactly.
Mhm.
Is like, so like if all the off-the-shelf answers are 80% of your needs, is the extra 20% worth the orders of magnitude engineering time to eat up the entire problem space? Like if you start thinking about it in that framework, you realize that if I get a vendor and spend only like engineering time to bridge the gap, that is probably better use of everybody's time than, just selling all of the 80% solutions. No, thank you. And I'm going to build everything 100% with the total cost of ownership afterwards.
Sounds like a math problem. Just kidding. We should jump to the questions. There are a lot of good questions. Is that okay?
Yeah. I
Okay,
grabbed
cool.
the first one on the list and I'll let y'all pick the other ones. What do you think about open source software? Usually the software is free, but the support is for sale. Would you consider that build or buy or something in the middle? I personally consider that build, because it's not just the support actually. Highly unlikely that an off-the-shelf open source solution will actually meet all your needs. Even less so than a paid solution, because with paid solutions, you can at least, depending on the size of the vendor and your size as a company, there could be conversations about having influence on the roadmap and whatnot. But with open source, it's a completely different dynamic. And then the other thing is, it still needs to come with all the rigor around reliability. The way you integrate an open source solution decides for you how successful you are with it. Graphite is an open source solution. And there's other open source solutions on top of it, like Grafana, to sort of try to build it into a full-fledged application monitoring product. Does that mean that it's buy? I would say no, because the level of effort to get a full stack with Graphite and Grafana, and the collection from whatever it is you're using to collect those metrics, and getting all of that and having it scale with you as you grow, still orders of magnitude engineering time more than if you get Honeycomb. Honeycomb is way more expensive, obviously, but that's what you get.
Has anyone here forked an open source solution and brought it in-house?
Oh boy. God.
No,
I have
bad practice.
I think it has happened in orgs I've been in, but I wasn't close enough to the situation. I don't know if anybody has done that and did not regret it later, unless you are such a large org that you have so much. Yeah, like now you're just basically gotten the worst of both worlds, in my opinion. Like you didn't build it yourself,
both worlds,
and you're still and it's just that just I have bad feelings about that.
Don't do that. All right.
Just contribute to the project, please.
Right. Yes. Contribute. Yep. Good. Wise words. Mikhail, would you like to jump to the next one?
Yeah, I think the question, if I understand correctly, is trying to ask what are the cost categories we should consider when we're doing build versus buy. I think for me, the costs are like OpEx cost, operational expenses cost, like how much a vendor solution will cost us at our current scale, and how does a build solution cost. With infrastructure, cloud technologies, everything. We should also do a projection. How does it look like in 3 years? Your company might be having in a growth trajectory and the cost can exponentially grow up. Second one is after integration cost, right? Like there will be on calls, there will be some support. What is that cost around? We should consider that cost into action. And on the build side, the cost will be like, we will not be building like a full-fledged solution. We will build like a minimum MVP kind of a requirement. So what is the future cost with future projects, which we are taking as a debt, which comes for free with the buy solution? Not free, actually, it's like paid, but I think these are the categories I would like do complete evaluation to dollar values or any currency value and compare with the audience, with the leaders.
Right. Yeah, I think with costs, usually it helps with what are we optimizing towards. If it's not, if we're okay to spend, then that usually usually answers the question.
And the answer to that also relies a lot on the stage the company is at. In my experience, if you are a company that has passed a few series of funding rounds and you're getting close to getting ready for IPO, you will quickly find out that your chief financial officer is very, very honed in on what is called the cost per million. in which case, if this vendor has a linear growth in cost with how much you sell, it becomes a very different conversation than if you can use them in a way where it's not growing at that same, like the graph is not looking the same. Because now it becomes a core part of the cost of providing the goods, and it's eating out of your margins. I know I'm speaking like I'm on CNBC right now, and I know that that's
I was like, you sound like you're speaking like a CFO right now.
Here's the thing: as engineers, especially as you get more senior, you have to understand these things. You have to know how much does it cost to provide our product? What is our margin? What do we do? Is it where we want it to be, or is it not where you want it to be? Because then you will get you'll come into the conversations with those who write the checks for the bills much more informed, and it'll be a much easier conversation if you understand their incentives.
Absolutely.
So yeah, that's a huge part of that.
One thing I want to add, since Sylvia mentioned all this business stuff, I'll give you all like a magic trick. There's a number with every company. So if there's a buy check below that number threshold, the checks are written very quickly. And if you go above that threshold, there's a very long scrutiny of the stage process. So know what that sweet spot is. If you find a vendor, go for it.
Would we like to jump to the open source question?
So I clicked to answer that one, but I feel like we already answered it earlier when I was talking about the cost. So I grabbed it just because I answered the initial one as well. If it's an anonymous attendee, but if you feel that I did not, please find us in Slack afterwards. We can also answer questions there afterwards. Yeah,
absolutely. All right, Rishi, would you like to jump to Matt Hawthorne's question?
So I think, Matt, good question on the bigness of the build versus buy decision can hold up moving forward. And he's asking, do you think it's a good idea to pursue building prototype in order to gain? I hate when people answer my question with it depends, but I'm going to do this here. It depends.
That's my cliche.
I think it depends. This one really depends on the company's culture and the clarity of the requirements. Sometimes building a prototype can bring a lot of clarity, and you could be really, really dirty prototype says, what are the interfaces? Even just write down the interfaces. What do you need? Mock response on the APIs. How do you want to structure this? But in other cases, if the prototype itself becomes a 4-week project, then I think you're going down the wrong path. And that's why I say it depends. But I completely agree. I think the decisions like these should not become a project in itself, because we didn't, by the way, talk of time to market at all as a decision so far. I think from my perspective, we are all in like as a startup or as a small company or even as a large software company, you are in the business of shrinking time. I says like you shrink time, then
there is no time.
So that I think don't make this itself a project which is a 3-month project to decide, and then you decide to go build, which is another 9 months. Or even if you decide to buy after that, that's also time. So,
yeah, I was going to say, or worse, you go in as a prototype, 3 months later, you throw the prototype in production, and you're coming in with not just less rigor around requirements, but you have less rigor around maturity and, production viability. Specifically also viability, because then like if you're throwing a prototype into production and it was started off as a prototype and now it's being thrown into production, very likely like nobody instrumented this for debugging in an incident.
Right. I think that's called innovation. I'm just kidding.
No, not doing that. Okay. So like be very careful about those lines, like it's like how did we get here kind of situations. Yeah.
I'll just add a quick nuance to Matthew's question is I think a decision has a lot of input vectors, right? Okay, cost, technology maturity, and a time to market, everything. And this output vector is a decision. So if the prototype is going to give one of the missing input vectors, which is basically maturity in the technology, or will they meet our requirements or not, if you are able to solve that answer with that prototype, yes, to Rishi's point, let's go and do a quick 1-week prototype. But if the decision committee or the stakeholders are looking for different kind of answers, a prototype may not like please them, and it may be completely waste of the time. So it's a balance. Depends.
I think, Nikhil, this is
Setting
the closest we
expectations in
came to
advance.
talk. I'm
Sorry?
saying this is the closest we came to talking AI language of optimization
I know
function.
vectors and inputs and
Okay,
Oh no.
no AI here.
I love that.
Sorry,
Oh,
Sylvia,
yeah.
go ahead.
No, it's fine. I was just saying, like, set your expectations up front because, if people are not on the same page and like one executive thinks you're about to go build a thing, but the other one is thinking it's a prototype that we're definitely throwing away no matter what, we're just going to learn from it and throw it away. Like, there's going to be unhappy conversations afterwards. I'll go ahead and jump to the next one.
Sounds good. Yeah.
Can you share concrete examples of cases where you've chosen to build or buy and regretted it? Absolutely. So I joined SendGrid back in the day when it was just past Series B, and I distinctly remember having conversations around our log monitoring, our log aggregation products. And at the time, and to be fair, this answer is very much colored with hindsight bias. We were not aware of our own size and the volume of our data and the throughput of ingest that we would have to get supported from customers. So we had a few rounds of attempting to integrate with vendors who were cheaper than the biggest player in the market at the time. I'll avoid mentioning names, but it was basically like, hey, the vendor that we have is too expensive. Let's find a different contract that's better, and multiple iterations of that conversation, and we end up finding with a POC with that vendor that they just cannot sustain our volume. And if we get more selective about the volume we're sending them, it impacts our own experience when we need this data. We will need to introspect this stuff in the incidents. So be very aware of it. Like if you are buying or building, obviously build is an easy one, whereas like I've been in cases where I've gone off and helped build things, and then 5 years later, or like a few years later, we were like, yeah, why did we build this in MySQL? It should have been in a managed database. And that's a bit of a build versus buy. So there's also that as well, like not understanding the cost of build correctly and the cost of incidents that come out of having a bespoke thing that not everybody understands how it works.
Right. Mikhail, do you have something to add to that?
I will add an example of a buy solution. So we did all the good best practices we discussed in the call, right? Like load testing with the vendor, making sure it meets all our SLOs, making sure they meet our requirements. Everything was good, right? But what happened over a period of a year or 2 years, the vendor onboarded new customers who are bigger than you, comparable to you. What they failed to do, or what we failed in assessment, was logical or physical separation of the data or the stack. And what we found is we started seeing latency issue with the whole system, or the API starting failing one after the other. And we were like, oh, it worked. Like during integration, everything worked fine. We had a slow tapered rollout. Everything worked perfectly fine. We with thanks to abstraction, we were quickly able to switch off and switch on a different vendor, and the whole business was normal as usual. But I would emphasize the listeners to think about the vendor architecture as well. How is your data isolated? What will happen with 5x traffic? Will your system still be able to sustain things like that, and included in the evaluation?
Those are good points. I think we've reached time. That was so fun and engaging. I think we should do this again next week. Just kidding. No, we should do this again next week. Thank you, Sylvia, Rishi, and Nikhil, for sharing your experiences and insights. There were a bunch of questions that we didn't get to that we actually prepared prior, such as, what advice would you give for someone who's about to make this decision, et cetera, et cetera. We'll post that in our Slack channel afterwards and then follow up with answers. So yeah, we'll be heading over to Slack. Please head over there to continue the discussion. And thank you, Dscope, for sponsoring.